Grooming is something that is widespread, it's happening all around us. Gang grooming means maybe thousands of people have been sexually abused, but they're being abused sometimes right in front of us. Scenario number one, buying the bikini in the store, is not an example of grooming. Did you spot that? And someone who has successfully groomed a child gets the child to believe certain things. Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Raj Persaud. I'm a consultant doctor and psychiatrist, and I'm based in private practice in Harley Street in London in the United Kingdom. Before I moved into full-time private practice, I was the consultant psychiatrist in clinical lead charge of a inpatient psychiatric ward at the Bethlehem Royal and Maudsley hospitals. And I was in charge of that ward from about 1994 to 2010. And through that experience, and also the experience of acting as an expert witness in various legal trials and court cases, I have some direct experience of child sexual abuse in terms of acting as an expert witness and also being consulted clinically in situations like this. So I want to talk today about grooming. This is very much in the news at the moment. There was bombshell announcements in the UK Parliament about gang grooming occurring particularly in the north of England. And one of the things that's very controversial is the idea that there's a race aspect to gang grooming here in the United Kingdom. In terms of convictions, men from a Pakistani background seem very likely to be convicted compared to other ethnicities by courts for child sexual abuse and grooming. So I want to talk about what grooming actually is. People seem to have leapt off the dark end of coming to a lot of speculation about the race element. But before you can do that, given in Parliament it was said that we don't have enough data and the data needs to be collected, though of course that could just be an excuse. And a lot of things in this situation are an excuse, to be frank. Anyway, I want to talk a bit about what grooming is. I believe that we can use these events in the news to take away some life lessons that can help you with your own life. You may be an adult watching this, and a lot of the content is going to be very adult, given the very dark nature of what we're going to be discussing. It may be that you don't have children, or you do have children, or it may be that there are children in your environment. Would you be able to spot grooming if the children around you were being groomed by someone? The research evidence is that you may answer that question with a very confident yes, that you would be able to spot grooming, but the research evidence suggests that although you are confident you could spot it, actually you probably won't or couldn't. In fact, the police themselves are lamentably bad, and this is one of the scandals that's going to come out in this case, at actually spotting grooming. And we're going to discuss some of that. Right at the end of this video, I'm going to be giving you a little psychological test just to see how good you are at spotting grooming. It's a very important life skill to ensure that you can spot it so that you could save a child who might be being groomed. And I'm going to give you a little psychological test with a couple of clinical vignettes where a case is outlined, and you have to make a decision as to whether you think these situations are very predictive of a very strong possibility that grooming might be occurring in the particular clinical vignette case that I'm going to give you. It could be, because there's two vignettes, that grooming is occurring in both of them, or neither of them, or in one of them. You decide, and then I'll reveal the correct answer. So we're going to subject you to a little psychological test as to whether you're really any good at spotting grooming. The evidence is that professionals, people who work in social work, and the care sector and the police, are actually not very good at spotting grooming at all. And that is one of the reasons that this scandal has erupted. The other reason this is an important subject to discuss is the very nature of grooming. A lot of people don't realize is that it is highly manipulative, and someone who has successfully groomed a child gets the child to believe certain things. For example, the child, given the deep manipulation involved in grooming, may believe they're the ones responsible for luring the child sexual abuser, the one who did the grooming, into a sexual act of some kind. And the child may feel guilty and as a result not want to report the event to the police. This is how deep the manipulation can go. And in many cases in Rochdale and Rotherham and Derby and many instances in the north of England where cases have come to court, it's clear the police have been bad at spotting it. And one of the reasons the police are bad at spotting is that they often actually don't understand the true nature of it. There is a race element, definitely, perhaps, in these cases, but there's also a race element in the fact the criticism that's been leveled at the police when reports have been done into this has been that they have a racial element, not so much, although the allegation is they're afraid to pursue Pakistani men or men from a Pakistani background because they're worried about being accused of being racist. But actually, the victims are very often working class white girls. And what's happened again and again is the police have revealed their almost disdain for this group of people. The police have ignored many of these girls' complaints that they're being sexually abused. The police have taken a view, and there's a term now in this sector called the non-ideal victim, that these girls have a shady past themselves. This is the view of the police, and therefore they may be responsible for what's happening. The police's view often is that actually if the girls were paid or there was a transaction of gifts, there's a sense in which the girls weren't being sexually abused but were acting more as prostitutes and were sex workers in a sense and making a living from this. This has been documented as some of the mistakes, very serious mistakes, the police have made in this situation. The other race element that's been neglected so far, and one of the judges did comment in a previous case, that it looked as though these Pakistani men treated with disdain the white working class girls that they were picking on because these girls were not from their community. And so they went out of their way to pick on these particular girls actually for reasons to do with race and their disdain for this particular group. The irony is the police seem to have had a disdain for the same group of white working class girls, and that is one of the reasons that this is a scandal, in the sense that it is possibly the case that there are many, many more victims than we realize, and the police have neglected their duty in prosecuting and pursuing the perpetrators of these acts and protecting these girls. So we're going to discuss what is grooming, what actually happened, who is to blame, and we're going to develop a deeper understanding of what happened, which shows the failures of social services and the police. And as I said before, we're going to give you a brief psychological test at the end to test how good you are at spotting grooming that might be occurring around you. So the first point that I believe is neglected is this is not just grooming that's in the news at the moment, it's gang grooming. The gang element has been neglected in terms of understanding what that means. What that means is a group of men are organized. They have a leader, they have followers, they have people who have been given tasks, like, for example, to identify potential victims. And then another group of men will be particularly good perhaps at luring the girls into the dark net that is this gang grooming situation. So it's more than just one person, a child abuser living on a street who targets a particular girl on that street and over a long period of time, and grooming does take a long period of time, which is something, again, the police may not have realized. One particular person will be a victim and will be targeted by one particular child sexual abuser living on a particular street. When you've got a gang involved, the perpetrator rate, i.e. the rate of victims, goes up dramatically. And one estimate from a previous report from the Rotherham situation is that 1,400 children had been sexually abused and exploited between 1997 and 2013. So the fact it's a gang and it's organized means the rates of abuse are dramatically high. And I believe that aspect of the case has not been fully understood. And that is why this scandal will run and run, because we'll discover that actually maybe thousands of girls were involved, given the gang nature of the situation. The other thing that I think people have neglected to understand is that these girls that were targeted were clearly vulnerable in the sense they often came from broken homes, they were often in the care system, they were often in trouble in some sense, or they were troubled. And it is very interesting that this is exactly the same group that were targeted by the notorious child sexual abuser Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile did charity work on purpose. It looks like it was a cover. And he went to care homes and hospitals and clinics and particular places where he was going to find vulnerable people. And their vulnerability was that the attention Jimmy Savile gave them seduced them because they weren't used to getting attention. And then having got attention and being a kind of seduced or manipulated into a child sexual abuse situation, they were loath to report Jimmy Savile for all sorts of reasons. Not least because perhaps it would mean that the attention they were getting would end, or they would end up being in trouble with the authorities. And these were people who were afraid of being in trouble. That was part of their vulnerability. So I do believe it is very interesting to see the link with the Jimmy Savile case in terms of the victims and why these particular victims, it turns out that child sexual abusers have a sixth sense as to who's going to be vulnerable. And they pick people that the police tend to neglect, that even when the children go to the police dismiss the claims because of the background of the children. So it is very interesting, that pattern that has repeated itself. So these are vulnerable people who are likely to be flattered by the attention they're getting, as in the case of Jimmy Savile, and also in the case perhaps of the Rotherham situation and Rochdale and so on. They're also a group of people who, because of their troubled background, are often not likely to be taken seriously, and that is why they're targeted by these child sexual abusers. They themselves are so manipulated that they are fearful of losing the attention or the benefits they're getting from the child sexual abuser. So that's one of the reasons why they may not pursue the complaint as vigorously as some people, others might. And that is why they are targeted. So there's quite a sophisticated targeting mechanism going on. The J report into the situation that happened up north before was damning of police actions. It said there were some examples, including girls as young as 13 years of age being blamed for placing themselves in situations where they could be sexually exploited by the police. So the police were misogynistic and had a dismissive attitude to young female victims. These were usually girls from an impoverished working class background, and the unpalatable truth of the situation is not just that these Pakistani men had a disdain or a contempt for these girls. The police did as well, actually, and previous reports have suggested that. One of the judges in the Rochdale case said that one of the reasons he believed these Pakistani men had targeted these white working class girls was that the race element was these Pakistani men believed that these girls were worthless beyond respect, and that's why they picked these girls as opposed to girls that came from their own community, the Pakistani community. Over and over again, we see an issue with the police whereby they view these girls as non-ideal victims. In other words, these are victims who have some kind of problematic background, and that means that the police take a view that they are complicit in their own abuse. And that is why the police do not pursue these cases properly. And that is one of the reasons why we're going to discover this is a scandal. An example of this from past examples is that the police found that girls as young as 10 years old were engaging in what the police described as consensual sexual activity and were complicit in their abuse, and this enabled their grooming and exploitation to continue. So the police, even with girls as young as 10, didn't take a view they were being sexually exploited or abused. They took a view that the girls as young as 10 were engaging in consensual sexual activity. Also, for example, in the Rochdale Borough Council case, local NHS sexual health services had referred 83 of these young girls to the local council. In other words, the NHS sexual health services team were picking up maybe sexual diseases that these young girls were getting. So there were red flags going up everywhere. This happened between 2004 and 2010. Another reason why the police have tended not to prosecute in these situations is they tended to view these girls as unreliable witnesses. Now, part of the grooming process is sex in exchange for material rewards. Often the way it begins, and there is a process we're going to discuss about how it begins, is that favors are given, often actually very interestingly, taxis, free taxi ride. It is interesting again and again, the cases in the north of England, how the men who are involved, who operate in gangs, often run taxi companies or drive taxis, and they start by offering girls free lifts. And it is interesting how these men, who are quite sophisticated and manipulative, target groups of girls out on the streets late at night. Why are these young girls out on the streets late at night? I'm not victim blaming here, but that's usually a sign that something's wrong at home. The girls are hanging around in groups of girls, so they believe they're protected in some sense, and the men know that. So these girls are actually more likely to strike up a conversation with a strange man who comes up and offers them a free taxi ride or something, or starts a conversation, because the women in a group of them believe they're protected on the street. What happens is, over a long period of time, the banter carries on, free taxi rides are given, gifts are given, and gradually, bit by bit, these men target a particularly vulnerable girl in the group and separate that girl over a period of time. And by that time, she doesn't realize, actually, she has now been targeted and separated from the group. So it's a long process. It's not a process that occurs overnight. So I just want to read you one really harrowing example here. At the South Yorkshire police, in the Rotherham child abuse case, a vulnerable child had been arrested at the home of a sex offender for possessing condoms. The report surmised that South Yorkshire police had only a limited understanding of the threat posed by sex offenders to vulnerable children. Let me read that again. So a vulnerable child had been arrested at the home of a sex offender. It was a child that was arrested for being in possession of condoms. This is the South Yorkshire police. Now, another example here is one of the victims reported the abuse to the police in August 2008, stating that she was being given alcohol and raped by multiple men. She provided police with her underwear, which was found to contain traces of one of the men's DNA. 2 members of the abusive group were arrested and released on bail. However, it took police 11 months to compile a brief of evidence for the Crown Prosecution Service after interviewing her on 4 occasions. In July 2009, an experienced CPS lawyer ruled that the victim was not credible and decided that the 2 men who raped her should be released without charge. During this time, she was sexually abused by 21 more men. The abuse of the girls continued until May 2010, 10 months after the case was dropped, when police revisited the investigation after a Rochdale Youth Project raised concerns about other complaints. Only then did the newly appointed Chief Crown Prosecutor, Nazir Afzal, revise the decision not to prosecute the men. That's a harrowing story where the police, again and again, are just not believing the girl for various reasons, to do with the fact they believe these girls have some kind of dark or troubled reputation from the past, and then to some extent are complicit to the trouble that they're landing up in. One of the other issues is the police are bad at spotting grooming. They don't realize that grooming involves, over a long period of time, the girl ending up believing that they are in an intimate consensual relationship. That's part of the manipulation. So the police don't see that journey and see how it begins and see the vital clues, which we're going to discuss. So one of the key psychological skills that these people in the gang groomers have is the ability to spot likely victims who are going to be vulnerable to being flattered by attention or gifts, victims who are vulnerable because they're emotionally deprived in some way, that they have low self-confidence and come from broken families. And that means that these people are also much less likely to break from the grooming that's occurring, because they're getting something from it, given their vulnerability, and go and report the situation to the police. So, in a way, one of the problems here is that the people involved in gang grooming are almost more sophisticated psychologically, believe it or not, than the police. Another thing that they do is they know that, let's say, the child has been in trouble for underage drinking before, and what they will do is they'll offer the child drink, and so the child then is nervous about reporting what's going on in terms of the sexualizing of the relationship, because they don't want to get into trouble for this other thing to do with drinking underage, which they've been in trouble in the past. These very manipulative groomers understand that dynamic. Let's come now to the psychological test. So I'm going to give you two scenarios. A 32-year-old man is on a tropical vacation with his 6-year-old daughter. She forgot her swimsuit back home, so he takes her to the store and buys her a bikini that she picks out. Okay, let me repeat the story. A 32-year-old man is on a tropical vacation with his 6-year-old daughter. She forgot her swimsuit back home, so he takes her to the store and buys her a bikini that she picks out. If you saw that happening, would that be evidence that grooming is occurring or not? Scenario number 2. A young girl is celebrating her 13th birthday with her parents. When her mother leaves the room, her stepfather tells her that he has gotten her a special birthday present. When she opens it, she discovers that he has bought her several bras. Then we repeat the scenario. A young girl is celebrating her 13th birthday with her parents. When her mother leaves the room, her stepfather tells her that he has gotten her a special birthday present. When she opens it, she discovers that he has bought her several bras. Okay. In the first scenario, a 32-year-old man is on a tropical vacation with his 6-year-old daughter. She forgot her swimsuit back home, so he takes her to the store and buys her a bikini that she picks out. This actually comes from an actual test, formal psychological test, that's used to train people to spot grooming, and this is an example where grooming is probably not occurring. And one of the clues there is that the father takes the daughter and the daughter buys the bikini. The daughter picks it out, so there's a consensual element to that. Very important to spot the subtle difference between someone being forced to pick something out, an item of clothing, an intimate item of clothing, by a man that accompanies her, and someone who's doing it of her own free choice. You've got to be vigilant for that. In scenario number 2, this is an example of grooming occurring. This again comes from an actual test given to try and train professionals in spotting grooming. In this case, a young girl is celebrating her 13th birthday with her parents. When her mother leaves the room, her stepfather tells her that he's gotten her a special birthday present. When she opens it, she discovers he has brought her several bras. So a couple of clues there. The man waits for the mother, the stepfather. The mother leaves the room, and then he says a special birthday present. This word special occurs again and again in grooming. We have a special relationship. This is a special secret between us. And basically, he's bought her several bras. That's not an appropriate present for a young girl from a stepfather. That's something really her mother should buy it. But notice that if she wanted bras and the mother wasn't buying it, she now is locked into a secret relationship with the stepdad. And these groomers understand that. And that is the way that grooming might begin. So scenario number 2, the 13th birthday with the bras, is an example of grooming. Scenario number 1, buying the bikini in the store, is not an example of grooming. Did you spot that? Okay. Basically, the research evidence is, by the way, that women are much better than men at this test in terms of spotting grooming, and there are various possible reasons for that. The other thing that people don't realize is grooming can occur in many different ways. There's grooming the child's environment. Often the groomer is grooming the child's parents or the child's carers, so that developing a trusting relationship so that the carers don't mind this man now offering to babysit, for example, which would then produce an opportunity for sexual abuse. So there's not just grooming of the child, there's grooming the child's environment, there's grooming the authority figures around the child, so developing a relationship of trust so that the groomer has access to the child. There's grooming the child's environment. There's sexual desensitization. So another common strategy that offenders may use to make a child compliant with child sexual abuse is called sexual desensitization. This occurs gradually. Normal physical or affectionate contact, such as bathing, snuggling, or tickling, may eventually progress into sexual touching and then possibly into more intrusive forms of sexual abuse. So be on the lookout for a person who's a bit too touchy-feely with a child. They may hug and it may look innocent, but gradually over a period of time, that hugging and that physical intimacy is going to grow and grow into something inappropriate. And then another good example is boundary violations. Offenders may use techniques that violate the child's privacy and personal boundaries. For example, 70% of victims reported that their abuser accidentally came into their bedroom or bathroom while the child was undressing. Additionally, if the offender is a caregiver for the child, he or she may refuse to allow the child to close doors for privacy. The offender may also inspect the child's body to see how it is developing. Almost a quarter of the victims also indicated that their abusers put lotion or ointment on them when they were alone. So, let's break down grooming into distinct phases. First phase, victim selection. Second phase, gaining access and isolation. Third phase, trust development. Fourth phase, desensitization to sexual content and physical touch. Fifth and final phase, post-abuse maintenance. So there's basically 5 phases: victim selection, gaining access, isolating, trust development, desensitization to sexual contact, and post-abuse maintenance. And these could take many days or weeks or even months for the groomer. They're very patient people, very manipulative, to go through the different phases. So victim selection, picking someone who's going to be compliant, who's trusting, has low self-esteem, is lonely, isolated, troubled, needy in some way, unwanted, unloved, therefore respond to attention, don't have parents around, has low parental surveillance, maybe comes from a broken home, and basically has a lack of supervision. And many groomers will go through many victims before they isolate and identify that particular victim. So the first phase is victim selection. The second phase is gaining access and isolation. So these men who are groomers are often involved in youth-serving organizations. They manipulate the family. We already talked about grooming the environment. They choose to do activities alone with the child. Then there's overnight stays and outings, and they separate the child bit by bit from peers and family. So this is the phase of gaining access and isolation. Then there's trust development. They are charming, they're nice, they're likable, they have an insider status, they're affectionate, they're loving, they give the child attention. Then there's favoritism, the child feels special, compliments, spending time with the child, engaging in childlike activities more than an adult normally would in order to seduce the child, giving the child special rewards and privileges, and then eventually at the hard end of this, providing drugs and alcohol, which the child feels wicked and enjoys that feeling, but that lures them in, obviously, because they're not going to report drugs and alcohol to a parent. So that's trust development. Then the next phase is desensitization to sexual content and physical touch. So the groomer will ask about sexual experiences, relationships, talk about sexual things they did. Inappropriate sexual language will be used. The groomer will offer to provide sex education. There'll be accidental touching. They'll watch the child undressing. They'll expose themselves, their naked body, by accident, and then it will get worse and worse. They may show child pornography to the child, and what will look like seemingly innocent contact but won't be, and then there'll be increased sexual touching. Final phase is post-abuse maintenance, and the child will be told not to tell anyone. There'll be the encouraging of secrets. One of the best antidotes to any child is to let them understand that any adult who wants to encourage them to keep secrets, that's a very dangerous situation. The groom will say, I love you, you're special. They will offer them rewards. They will be persuaded the child that it was acceptable behavior. And the victim will often be made to feel responsible. And there will be threats if the child goes to the police. So, to summarize, grooming is something that is widespread, it's happening all around us. Gang grooming means maybe thousands of people have been sexually abused, but they're being abused sometimes right in front of us. So we need to be vigilant for grooming while it's occurring around us. The police are lamentably bad. They actually seem to be misogynistic and don't take these particular children because of their troubled background seriously enough. And I think that social services, the care system, the police are all part of a wider problem we have in Britain today, where people just don't do their jobs. Instead, people spend most of their time trying to appear to do their jobs than actually do their jobs. This is a scandal that's going to run and run, but please, will people try to get to understand what grooming actually is before they leap off the deep end and find someone to blame? I believe that actually multiple agencies are to blame. The courts are to blame, the Crown Prosecution Service is to blame, the police are to blame, and obviously these perpetrators are to blame as well. But all different parts of the system are to blame, and they need to be improved. And one of the problems is they don't really understand what grooming is, and we've tried to lift the veil on this very dark area. Thank you very much for watching and listening. I'd value your comments. I appreciate it's a very controversial area. I appreciate that much of what I said may be very irritating or offensive, but I am attempting to try and lift the veil on a very, very controversial, provocative, but important subject, which is, what is child sexual grooming? What is gang grooming? Thank you.